Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I wish to extend a warm welcome to all participants and thank you for taking the time to join us today. My name is Paul Holton, and I'll be your moderator for today's regional briefing. I'm the program head for the Conventional Arms and Ammunition Program, or CAP for short, of the United Nations Institute for Disarmament Research, UNIDIR. UNIDIR is an independent and autonomous research institute within the United Nations, focusing on disarmament and international security related issues. Our goal is to assist the international community to develop the practical and innovative ideas needed to find solutions to critical security problems. My program, CAP, undertakes research to examine the supply side and demand side dynamics of the illicit proliferation of conventional arms and ammunition and identify effective measures to tackle the unregulated transfer, illicit circulation, and misuse of such conventional arms and ammunition. We share our key findings via advice and support to multilateral processes like the Programme of Action on Small Arms, as well as in capacity building for states, regional and international organisations, as we seek to promote ideas and action to prevent or mitigate the negative impact of unregulated proliferation and misuse of conventional arms and ammunition, and thus lay the foundations for peace, security and sustainable development. Before we begin the session proper, I'd like to provide some brief housekeeping announcements. First, you're definitely in the right place if you're here for the regional briefing to prepare for participation in the 8th Biennial Meeting of States for the Programme of Action on Small Arms. We're starting pretty much on time and we'll try and finish in exactly 1 hour. Please kindly note that cameras and microphones will be off by design throughout this webinar. That said, participants are strongly encouraged to engage with the panelists' presentations by posting their questions using the question and answer function at any time during the event. If you look to the bottom right of the screen, hopefully you can see this action either via the Q&A button or the speech bubble, which will open the chat and enable you to pose questions. Please do pose questions at any time during the presentations. As time permits, I'll relay these questions from the floor to our panelists. If you'd like to indicate your name and affiliation, please feel free to do so. Should any questions go unanswered because of time constraints, UNIDIR will follow up with the panelists and provide you with a response bilaterally after the event. Please also note that all of the briefings will be recorded and made available on UNIDIR's website and our YouTube channel. Of course, our reliance on technology to conduct activities under the pandemic cannot be understated, but technology is not perfect, and therefore we've had to put in place some measures to deal with potential disruptions. This is a secure platform and all participants have joined using unique personalized links. But should the virtual platform be compromised, we'll close it down and launch a new meeting. And new access links will be emailed to you immediately, and we should be able to resume the event within 5 to 10 minutes. This is a backup measure, and I'm confident we will not have to use it. Finally, I'd like to stress that UNIDIR promotes the core values of the United Nations: integrity, professionalism, and respect for diversity. As such, UNIDIR is committed to convening diversity in voices and opinions. Nonetheless, the views expressed in the event today are the sole responsibility of the individual panelists. They don't reflect the views or opinions of the United Nations, UNIDIR, its staff members, or sponsors. We gathered here today because we understand the importance of enhancing thinking and exchanging ideas on substantive issues in preparation for the 8th Biennial Meeting of States, BMS 8, on the Programme of Action on Small Arms, PoA for short, and also the International Tracing Instrument, or ITI. BMS 8 will take place in New York from the 27th of June to the 1st of July 2022. We think that national, regional, and global implementation of the PoA and the ITI are key in contributing to the comprehensive control of small arms and light weapons throughout their life cycle, as well as in preventing their diversion and misuse. And to support preparations for BMS 8, and thanks to support provided by member states, UNIDIR and the Office for Disarmament Affairs are co-organising this series of online briefings for each UN regional grouping. Each briefing will begin with a panel discussion consisting of presentations on topics to be considered during BMS 8. We'll then hopefully have some time for a brief discussion between the panelists. We hope that today's event, and indeed our series of regional briefings as a whole, will contribute to enhancing dialogue on some of the critical aspects of the PoA's implementation at various levels and in different regions, as well as connections with other key international discussions and deliberations. As with all of our activities, we very much welcome your feedback and suggestions for further improvement. But before I turn over to our panelists, I'd like to begin with an opening video message from the Chair Designate of BMS 8, His Excellency Ambassador Mr. Enrique Manalo. Please.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, delegates. I thank the UNIDIR and UNODA for organizing this regional briefing for each of the 5 regional groups of the United Nations. As BMS 8 is fast approaching, this regional briefing was designed to stimulate thinking and exchange of ideas on substantive issues in preparation for the 8th Biennial Meeting of States on the PoA and ITI, scheduled to take place in New York from 27 June to 1 July 2022. I believe this regional briefing is important and would be helpful to delegates, especially those new to the portfolio, to be better reminded of the key issues and outcomes of BMS 7, to have an overview of the highlights in the PoA/ITI implementation, to zero in on key concerns relating to international cooperation and assistance, and to be more keen on other possible important issues for consideration at BMS 8 and the 4th Review Conference. In the past several informal consultations on BMS 8, I have had the good fortune of having smooth and fruitful discussions with delegations. Your substantive inputs have helped the chair shepherd the group to coming up with progressive versions of the outcome document in the last several weeks. I hope we continue this momentum until the week itself of BMS 8. In this regard, I wish your region a fruitful discussion on BMS 8 over the next hour, and I look forward to seeing all of you in New York next week. Thank you, and good day to all.
We'd like to offer our sincere thanks and appreciation to His Excellency Ambassador Manalo for his support and great interest shown during the preparation of these briefings. And of course, we wish him all the best for the final round of preparations for the 8th Biennial Meeting of States on the Programme of Action. I think it was an excellent way to start our regional briefing. We have several excellent presentations to follow. But first, I'm in the unusual situation of introducing myself, as I'll be the first speaker on today's panel before handing you over to other esteemed colleagues. And I'll be providing a brief overview of the key issues and outcomes from BMS 7, the 7th Biennial Meeting of States on the Programme of Action. So without any further ado, I'll open our presentations. Please. So I will provide you with a scene setter for today's briefing on preparations for BMS 8 by highlighting some of the key issues and outcomes from BMS 7 as indicated on this slide. I'll very briefly touch upon the issue of diversion, also measurability and implementation, peace, security and sustainable development, and the international tracing instrument discussions surrounding implications of developments in manufacturing, technology and design, and then finally a few words on international assistance. Unfortunately, we don't have time to focus on all the issues discussed in BMS 7 and indeed that you're likely to consider in BMS 8. I won't go into international cooperation or emerging challenges or many of the other issues too. But I think that we can discuss some of these items towards the end of this session. I know that the participants in this briefing are all experts on the PoA, the Programme of Action, but I always like to start with some basic facts. The Programme of Action on Small Arms, the PoA, was adopted by member states in 2002 in order to strengthen and develop agreed norms and measures at the global, regional and national levels, to enforce and further coordinate efforts to prevent, combat and eradicate the illicit trade in small arms and light weapons in all its aspects. There were discussions around how to eradicate illicit manufacturing and trafficking, an emphasis on focusing on the regions of the world where conflicts are coming to an end or where there are still serious problems with excessive and destabilizing accumulations of such weapons, intent to mobilize political will throughout the entire international community to prevent and combat illicit transfers and manufacturing, and also to promote responsible action by states to prevent the illicit export, import, transit, and retransfer of small arms and light weapons. In 2005, the General Assembly adopted the International Tracing Instrument, which specifically provides a framework for cooperation in weapons tracing, and thus fulfilling one of the major commitments made by governments for the Programme of Action. Further, the Programme of Action included provisions for a periodic review of implementation, and therefore we have these BMS, Biennial Meetings of States. We'll also have a review conference, or RevCon, the next one to take place in 2024, an ad hoc occasional MGE, or meetings of governmental experts, to focus upon particular issues. Unusually, BMS 8 is taking place just a year after BMS 7 due to COVID complications, and therefore we have a rather unusual annual rather than a biennial meeting of states perhaps. Just for your information, I've put the mandate for BMS 7 on this slide, and it's only 11 months since this meeting took place. In addition to the standing item of reviewing implementation of the PoA and the ITI, BMS 7 focused on preventing and combating the diversion and the illicit international transfer of small arms and light weapons to unauthorized recipients, and therefore I thought it appropriate to begin my discussion today on this as one of the key issues. I'd like to begin by underlining that BMS 7 recognized that there are diversion risks at each stage of the life cycle of a weapon, that is, from manufacture, before and during transfers, at post-delivery storage in stockpiles, and of course at points of end use or disposal. The discussions at BMS 7 also indicated situations in which the illicit transfer to unauthorized recipients could take place, mentioning inter alia cross-border trafficking without appropriate authorization, unauthorized retransfer by states, and violations of arms embargoes imposed by the Security Council. In my opinion, I'd like to highlight that the PoA is an instrument that contains provisions to prevent, combat, and mitigate the risk of diversion at each stage in the life cycle. It calls for the exercising effective national control over the whole life cycle of small arms and light weapons in all their aspects, and this includes controlling manufacture and within states' areas of jurisdiction, export, transit, transshipment, import, and retransfer, as well as providing for the safe, secure, comprehensive, and effective management of stockpiles through adequate marking, record keeping, inventory management, and accounting control measures. At BMS 7, there was also a call for strengthening and advocating a whole-of-government approach to mitigating diversion risks, where possible and consistent with domestic laws, to try and improve long-term standardized, systematic, and disaggregated data collection, and of course analysis of such data with a view to strengthening efforts to prevent diversion in the future. So for me, it was really reinforcing and highlighting some of the key elements that are already in the Programme of Action, a useful reminder for states. Something that has become a newer topic for meetings in relation to the Programme of Action is the issue of trying to focus on increasing understanding of progress in implementation. And moreover, I think what works or has worked to tackle the illicit trade in small arms in all its aspects. Here, the discussions at BMS 7 looked at some of the traditional elements contained within the Programme of Action, such as the use of national action plans on small arms and light weapons to tackle priority challenges, and also the use of reports for assessing progress and implementation. There were also calls for further strengthening cooperation with entities beyond the state that can help with implementation: civil society, youth, victims and survivors of armed violence, parliamentarians, industry, and the private sector. For me, there was also a bit of work to build on positive experiences in some countries and regions to consider the establishment of voluntary national and regional targets. And I'll come back to this when discussing international assistance. And finally, there was also promoting the collection of disaggregated data by sex, which I'll touch upon now. Building on previous discussions within the PoA framework, the BMS 7 outcome document highlighted the benefits of connecting implementation of the PoA with global and national development efforts. At the global level, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, its goals, targets, and indicators, especially but not only Indicator 16.4.2. The discussions also highlighted connections with the Women, Peace and Security, or WPS agenda, highlighting linkages that could be made between national action plans and policies on small arms and WPS, and on which I think we'll hear much more about what's going on in the region in a moment. There was also recognition of calls to ensure the equal, full, and effective participation of women in all policy planning and implementation processes, mechanisms, and fora, for data collection where feasible, to be disaggregated by sex, age, and disability to take account of the differing impacts of the illicit small arms trade. And then, of course, not just to collect this data for the point of collecting data, but to use this data to inform evidence-based, gender-sensitive policymaking and programming, as well as then to exchange experiences, lessons, and good practices in this regard. The discussions on the ITI, the International Tracing Instrument, called for member states to reinforce efforts to implement record keeping, marking, and tracing provisions of the ITI, regardless of materials, design, or methods used for manufacturing small arms and light weapons. The exchange of views on recent developments in manufacturing, technology, and design focused especially on polymer and modular weapons. There was a proposal made during BMS 7 for the establishment of an open-ended working group to address challenges and opportunities for marking, tracing, and record keeping of such weapons. Indeed, paragraph 100 called for consideration of this proposal at BMS 8, and a vote was held on this particular paragraph, with 100 member states voting in favour, 1 voting against, and 10 abstentions. In addition, BMS 7 also requested the Secretariat to develop a good practice document on marking practices for polymer and modular weapons, taking into account the views of all member states. As always, considerable emphasis on the continuing importance of international assistance to ensure the effective and comprehensive implementation of the PoA was a central feature of discussions in last year's meeting. Several provisions on ways to further enhance and strengthen comprehensive international assistance for life cycle management were emphasized, including for greater cooperation, coordination, and information sharing at the regional level and between different regions, as well as at the international level. From my side, what was particularly interesting here was the question as to whether international assistance is effective or whether in some cases we're seeing a duplication of efforts. As mentioned a moment ago, the issue of voluntary national and regional targets was raised again in connection with international assistance. It was highlighted that this could be a way that member states could use such information to support their requests for assistance and also to help mobilize resources for priority areas for action. Finally, BMS 7 requested the Secretariat to present at BMS 8 funding and administrative arrangements for a dedicated fellowship training program to strengthen technical knowledge and expertise in areas related to the implementation of both the PoA and the ITI. And there was also reference to existing UN assistance programs, such as the Secretary General's Saving Lives entity, Salient, and the Trust Facility for supporting cooperation on arms regulation, or UNSCAR. As my presentation time is almost up, I just thought I would conclude with a short summary of some of the key areas contained in the outcome document of BMS 7 for the PoA, and to demonstrate some of the proposals made for the national, regional, international levels, as well as for the ITI, and also to highlight the cross-cutting issue of international cooperation and assistance to implement. At the national level, as I mentioned earlier, there was the call to implement PoA provisions to prevent diversion. They also highlighted emerging challenges relating to blank firing weapons and conversion challenges. And as I've discussed today, strengthening the measurability and implementation of the PoA. At the regional level, there was an encouragement to look at regional instruments, roadmaps, and action plans to provide support and assistance and implement the PoA, as well as promoting and strengthening cross-border and regional cooperation in this regard. At the international level, a restating of the commitment to look at conflict and post-conflict settings in more detail, as well as linkages between the armed violence and broader peace, security, and sustainable development agendas. And for the ITI, as I mentioned a moment ago, the issue of technologies, in particular polymer and modular weapons. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for your attention, and I hope that this has been a useful reminder of what we've discussed previously before I pass over to our colleagues to give you a bit more of a forward-looking perspective. So without any further ado, I'd now like to welcome Ida Scarpino, our very dear colleague from the UN Regional Center for Peace and Disarmament in Asia and the Pacific, In advance, Ida, I'd really like to thank you for contributing to this briefing with your regional perspective, experiences, and highlights on the implementation of the PoA. I understand you're going to pick up on several of the issues I've introduced already and carry them forward, especially on gender in the Programme of Action, the issues of data and implementation in the region, and also propose some ways to look forward. So without any further ado, I'll pass over to you, Ida, and the screen is now yours.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, wherever you are. Thank you so much, Paul, for your kind introduction and for giving UNRCPD the opportunity to participate in this very important and timely briefing. And I'm very honored to be here with other esteemed colleagues and to share our experience from the regional center. So allow me to take my presentation and share my screen very quickly. Okay. I hope it won't take a lot of time. Okay. Yes. Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay, I think you see my presentation now. Let me put it on the presentation mode. And okay, so here we go. I hope you can all see my presentation. So as Paul already mentioned, my presentation is divided in different segments, mainly three, if I'm able to, okay. Yes, so three sections. The first section is about UNRCPD relevant work to assist the member states with the implementation of the program of action, and particularly in the context of a project, a regional project on gender and small arms control, which focuses on the integration of gender relevant considerations into the implementation of the program of action, and also the synchronization of the program of action with converging agendas such as women, peace and security, and sustainable development. And then I also would like to share with you some data that we collected from the report submitted in 2022 by member states in Asia Pacific, and covering the implementation period of 2020-2021. And then I will conclude with sharing with you some information about upcoming opportunities and projects and how we can continue to assist the member states with the implementation of the program of action. So as I said, UNRCPD in 2020 started a project on gender and small arms control. The main objective is to assist the member states with the integration of gender into small arms control related policy, legislations, and operation. And also to align small arms control with other agendas, such as women, peace and security, sustainable development, gender-based violence prevention, and so on. And this project is being funded by the European Union and is currently implemented in 6 countries of our region, namely Bangladesh, Cambodia, Laos, Nepal, Papua New Guinea, and Timor-Leste. Now we are at the end of this project. Right now, I'm in Bangladesh, I'm in Dhaka, and tomorrow we will conduct the final round of activities under the project, and we will conduct a training on gender and small arms control, targeting government officials in Bangladesh. And the training will also have a great focus on the gender provisions of the UN program of action, because the ultimate objective of this project is to help member states with translating the gender-related provisions that are contained in the UN program of action. So far, we conducted trainings and follow-up activities in 5 countries, and we reached out to 147 government officials, parliamentarians, and civil society representatives, among them 72 women. The training on gender mainstream in small arms control, which is basically the main activity of this project, is usually follow up by a second activity, what we call the follow-up activity, whose objective is to translate into practice the recommendations, the result of the training. And just to give you an example of some follow-up activities that we conducted in the targeted countries, for instance, in Laos, we had a national workshop, a consultation workshop on reviewing existing national action plan, such as National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security or Gender-Based Violence Prevention, and to identify entry points for the integration of small arms control and to align the implementation of this National Action Plan with the efforts of the government under the UN Program of Action. And we conducted similar activities also in the other countries. And then we also, in the framework of this project, we continue to collaborate with the civil society and parliamentarians to advocate on the universalization of key instruments on small arms control, such as the Arms Trade Treaty, and also the full implementation of the Program of Action. And I'm very glad to see Emily from Alianza here today, because we collaborated quite a lot with Alianza and we conducted several webinars gathering civil society, parliamentarians, and to maintain the discussion on gender responsive small arms control in the wake of COVID-19. We also published together a briefing paper on gender responsive small arms control in Asia Pacific during COVID-19. And I can share with you the paper later on. And then, as I said, since this project is really focused on assisting member states with implementation of the gender provision of the Program of Action, but I would say with the general implementation of the Program of Action, because at the end of the day, gender is a cross-cutting issue in the different stages covered by the Program of Action. We had two targeted activities on national reporting under the UNPOA. In the lead up to the two biennial meeting of states that we had during this period. So last year on 28th May 2021, in the lead up to BMS 7, we conducted an online training on a national report on the Program of Action. This training was a regional training because we invited all member states covered by our region, by our center. We covered 43 countries in our region. And then and the objective of this online training was to promote the submission of national reports, because as you will see in my next slides, the Asia Pacific is the region with the lowest number of national reports submitted on the Program of Action. And we had also a similar activity a few weeks ago at the end of May in the lead up to BMS 8. So once again, we really encourage member states to submit the national report on the UN Program of Action, and we stand ready to assist the member states with this task. A quick snapshot on the status of national reporting on the UNPOA in our region. So as I said, our regional center covers 43 states. So out of the 75 national reports submitted worldwide this year, and the deadline for the national report submission was last week, the 15th of June 2022. So only 11 reports came from the Asia Pacific region, so out of 75. And as I said, the deadline was 1 week ago, so there are still a few member states that are finalizing the reports. So hopefully we will get more reports before BMS 8 or after BMS 8. I also would like to specify that I mentioned the deadline of 15th of June. So this deadline actually serves for the Secretariat to collect information that they will be shared during BMS 8. But this doesn't mean that if you miss the deadline of 15th of June, you cannot submit the report anymore. But the Secretariat continue to receive report even after the 15th of June. And then if we do a comparison with last year. While this year we received 15% of total reports, last year 14% of total report. So there is a very slight decrease, but I believe this is also due to the fact that, as I said, there are few member states that are still finalizing the report covering the implementation period 2020-2021. These are the 11 states that submitted the report this year compared to the report that we received in 2020, 14 states. And also, I would like to specify that the deadline for submitting the reports, the 2020 report, was last year. So I also believe that the low number is also due to the fact that there are a lot of member states that they reported last year covering the implementation period 2017-2018. So this also, I think, is another element to justify why so far we only receive 11 reports. One thing that I would like to highlight with regard to the data that you could actually see, because these are publicly available data. If you go on the website of smallarms.unarm.org, I will share the link in the chat box. So there you can retrieve some statistics from the reports submitted this year. So something that it is really not a practice in our region is the existence of the presence of national coordination mechanism on the implementation of the UN Program of Action or National Action Plan on the implementation of the UN Program of Action. And also very few member states in our region that have a designated focal point on the UN PoA. So this is something that we also try to encourage in the framework of our project, because having a dedicated focal point on the implementation of the PoA will also help the member states with reporting tasks. So as you can see from this graph, we only have 3 countries in our region that had a dedicated national action plan on small arms-related weapons, and then we also have 12 countries. Actually, this is a positive trend compared to last year. 12 countries that established a national coordination agencies on small arms control or on the implementation of the UN Program of Action. And then we also have 14 member states that have a designated national focal point. And once again, this is a positive trend if we compare this data with the data received last year, because last year we had about 4 or 5 countries that actually had a designated focal point on the PoA. Very quickly, these are the gender considerations, the gender indicators that are included in the section number 10 of the reporting template of the PoA. So our project on gender mainstream in small arms control is really focused on the implementation of these 7 targets for the integration of gender consideration into the PoA implementation. I'm not going to read all the indicators, but you can see that the main points are about data collection, as also Paul highlighted, because data collection data actually will allow us to integrate the gender analysis in the implementation of the PoA, and also to develop policies and legislation according to the gender specific impact of small arms-related weapons. And also another important point is to promote women participation in this field, because as you all know, is a male-dominated field. And also there is, you could see that last year at BMS 8, this section, gender consideration, was slightly modified to improve the gender language. So before we talk about the meaningful participation of women in the PoA process, now we talk about the equal, full and effective participation of women in small arms control. And we also add another layer of disaggregation of the data, because last year we talked about the sex and age disaggregated data, and at BMS 8 we also added data disaggregated by disability. With regard to where we are with implementation, with measuring the gender indicator of the PoA, you could see that only 4 states reported to collect disaggregated data. And we have, you could see a few states that actually reported to implement the indicators, the 7 indicators that we have seen in the previous slide. And just take a moment to look at this data. That is the data of the reported submitted this year in last week. And you can see that there is a slight improvement if we see the data submitted in the data submitted in the 2020 report, because last time we only had 2 states collecting disaggregated data, and fewer states reporting on the implementation of the 7 indicators, the gender indicators of the program of action. So there are some positive trends, and we hope that with the implementation of this project, we will continue to build on these results. Also, another good point that was already raised by Paul, so I'm not going to take longer on this slide, is the importance of national report to request assistance with the implementation of the program of action. So national report, they're not also useful for transparency, for measure the implementation, the status of the PoA, but also is a tool for member states to request assistance with the implementation of the specific provisions of the PoA. So if we look at the data collected in 2022, this year, we collected different requests from the member states in Asia Pacific, and you can see how we disaggregated these requests for thematic area. So we had some states that request assistance in manufacturing, transfer, brokering, stockpile management, destruction, seizure, record keeping, and tracings. And these are the different sections of the reporting template of the and to conclude, as I said, now we are at the final stage of the current project on gender and small arms control, which had a great focus on the program of action implementation. And the next stage, we are actually we are discussing right now with our donor, the European Union, the phase 2 of this project. And the phase 2 will have actually, will be entirely focused on the implementation of the program of action. And of course, gender will be a cross-cutting issue. And we are still finalizing the proposal and the 3 pillars of this project, because we are waiting for the results of BMS 8, because based on the discussion of BMS 8 and the recommendations of member states and the other stakeholders, we will finalize the different activities of the project phase 2. So it will be very important for member states to share their knowledge, experience, identify gaps and opportunities with the implementation of the UNPOA, because then we can pick up all these elements and we can tailor our activities to your specific needs. I think I can stop here. Paul, I hope I didn't take longer than planned. And of course, if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer your questions. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Ida, for joining us from Dakar in the middle of what I understand is implementing the project on gender and small arms control, and indeed activities already ongoing live to support implementation of the PoA. And I'm very grateful for you not just sharing some information about the project with regard to the critical issue of gender mainstreaming and gender sensitive programming and policy making, but also introducing an issue that's close to my heart, which is reporting on progress made in implementation of the PoA and to highlight existing needs and some priority areas for action. So thank you also for giving us that sign, as well as taking us beyond BMS 8 and already having to think about the 4th review conference. So thank you so much for that very, very useful contribution. Finally, we'd like to conclude today's briefing with contributions from the International Action Network on Small Arms, IANSA, and also Nonviolence International Southeast Asia. IANSA has been particularly active in preparations for BMS 8, strongly advocating for the importance of an effective implementation of the PoA. And therefore, I'd like to thank first Amélie Namori of IANSA and also Mitzi Ostoiro and Fred Lubang of Nonviolence International Southeast Asia for agreeing to share their views with us in this session. I'm hopeful that we'll have a good, rich concluding a couple of presentations here to bring us forward to the conclusion of this session. So first, I propose we go straight over to you, Amélie, for your remarks, and then we can go directly to Mitzi and Fred, so that you don't need to hear any more from me. We can go through your 3 interventions in a row. So over to you, Amélie.
Thank you very much, Paul. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Amélie Namuro, and I am the Program Officer for IANSA, the International Action Network on Small Arms. It's my pleasure to be here today as part of this regional briefing in preparation for BMS 8. First, I would like to thank you, UNIDIR, for the invitation, and especially for thinking of a creative and effective way to bring together stakeholders in the lead up to BMS 8 and for supporting the participation of civil society organizations during this briefing. I would just like to briefly reflect on a few key issues that from IANSA's perspective should be taken into consideration by member states during next week's discussions. All 6 key issues that IANSA has identified as needing particular attention at BMS 8 focus on previous progress. Each biennial meeting of states or review conference has provided material and precedents for the meetings that follow. It's therefore critically important that the previous outcome documents serve as a floor for consideration of proposal and not as a ceiling. The illicit trade, proliferation, and misuse of SALW for violence and crime is changing, and states need to address those changings. Millions of people around the world continue to be affected by violence and abuses committed or facilitated by the irresponsible use of such arms. So now following is a brief overview of the 6 key issues that IANSA has identified as needing particular attention for the upcoming BMS 8. So for each of these key issues, I will briefly indicate why this issue is important. So first, building on the gender outcomes of REFCON 3 and BMS 7 and ensuring the inclusion of survivors and youth. As originally approved, the PoA gave little attention to affected communities and underrepresented groups. The words gender, youth, and survivors were not even included in the 2001 text, for example. Through efforts of civil society and of our diplomatic partners, we have made significant progress on inclusion in the last several years. But there is still much more work to be done. One measure of progress is the extent to which members of traditionally underrepresented groups speak for their delegations. Secondly, enhancing measures for the collection and destruction of SLW and their ammunition. So the timely destruction of illicit, obsolete, and surplus small arms and light weapons and its ammunition is a primary method of preventing the excessive and destabilizing accumulation of such material and ensuring it will not be diverted to illicit markets or to unauthorized end users or end uses. Securing legal stockpiles and decommissioning illicit, obsolete, and surplus weapons is important and can decrease the risk of diversion. Thirdly, moving forward on developing national targets for implementation of the PoA. So another positive development included in the BMS outcome document was the proposal that states consider setting voluntary national and regional targets to support the implementation of the PoA and of the ITI. Setting such targets for both SLW and their ammunition would allow states to supplement existing more general goals with more specific measurable objectives they themselves have developed. This could increase the ownership of each country in the resulting activities and their success, while also improving accountability as long as the objectives are consistent with implementing the PoA and ITI. Fourthly, ensuring attention to synergies among instruments that are critical to preventing SALW proliferation, violence, and harm. One of the most contentious issues in the PoA process in recent years has been the extent to which outcome documents should acknowledge potential synergies between the PoA and other instruments like the UN Firearms Protocol and the Arms Trade Treaty in particular. The illicit arms trade is a complex issue involving a wide range of potential factors. Taking advantage of synergies among relevant international as well as regional instruments that address the trade in SALW can help increase their collective power to control this trade and reduce its human cost. Fifth, increase attention to the need for sustainable international cooperation and assistance in implementing the PoA and the ITI. So fully implementing the PoA and ITI involves tasks with a wide range of costs and complexity. Some of these may involve moderate costs in some countries with significant infrastructure and far larger costs in countries that lack this infrastructure. A common response to this situation is to view international cooperation and assistance as something that flows from wealthier countries to less wealthy ones. But it is also possible to have cooperation among countries with high level of resources. And importantly, there is also the possibility of peer-to-peer cooperation between and among countries that have fewer material resources. Lastly, the last key issue, the sixth one, is setting a robust agenda and mandate for REFCON 4. One of the key tasks for BMS 8 will be to establish a mandate for the fourth review conference on the Program of Action and International Tracing Instruments, REFCON 4, which is scheduled to be held in 2024, as my colleagues has mentioned earlier today. REFCON 4 offers a critically important opportunity to propose programs and actions to improve the implementation of the PoA and ITI. So for more information on this sixth issue, you can refer to our upcoming publication that will come out this week and will be on our website, and that we will also share during BMS 8. Thank you very much. And I now proudly pass the floor to my colleagues at Nonviolence International Southeast Asia, Mitzi Ostero and Fred Lubeng. Thanks again.
Thank you, Emily. Paul, can I ask you to share the PowerPoint? Thank you for sharing, everyone. So I'll skip those parts and just go directly to our part. So now we have a baseline research that actually focused on the area, some of the activities that covers the life cycle of weapons. And I'm just presenting the activities that focuses on where the region has commonalities, which could be explored for cooperation. So earlier, it was Ida, I think, who shared the result of where the assistance was asked. So I also noted that I think we have, at least in our table, we have something in common, that in stockpile management, there were 4 requests for assistance and tracing. So those two are also activities that we found that is common in these 7 countries. We weren't only able to look into 7 out of 10 ASEAN countries. So Brunei, Singapore, and Myanmar was not included in this. So for national, this is PoA focused. This table is PoA focused, and looking at if legislation, it's present in all seven states. That's here. Criminalization of violations to these laws is also present. Marking, I would like to nuance this that though I did not check Cambodia or Laos, it's because there are no civilian possessions in the two countries. There are also no manufacturing. In Vietnam, there's also no civilian possession, but they do have a state manufacturing only for their defense use. So for all these activities, national laws regulating SOLW, criminalization, marking, stockpile management, tracing, and disposal are areas where regulations are already present, and where us as civil society can complement efforts and initiatives in the region. In terms of disposal, though, I would like to stress that it might not be present in the law, but they are present in they have administrative procedures in place. It's not normal that they would have the disposal, the specifics of how to dispose these weapons, especially those confiscated or those captured, those that have been part of operations by the state that were either confiscated or from different activities at the national or domestic level, but it's present. So with looking at the presentations earlier, it was already discussed that where are these activities? Where are we looking at for the BMS 8, the region, where are we moving forward? There has been a lot of developments in terms of legislation in the last 3 years. There has been updating on legislations in different countries, in various countries that we are working in. So there are going to be still spaces, but considering the UN ASEAN framework for security and cooperation, it will be worthwhile to see that at least these activities are present and may be able to add to the efforts that the UN and ASEAN framework on security cooperation is headed. We have been sharing this with our with these authorities in these countries, just to give them as well an idea of where the others are. Where it's always good to be updated and informed of the other states' actions, especially since the last 2 years. A lot of things have moved online, and there's very few. It's picking up, but there were very few platforms to exchange information among various state authorities on their own national development. So it might also be not yet reflected in the reports. I have not checked how many members from ASEAN has submitted the national reports, but since some have just recently updated their laws or administrative procedures, it might not be directly reflected immediately on the reports. So that's something that could be noted. I think from there, I'll give it to Fred as well, if he'd like to add. And if you have questions on this, we'd be happy to answer. But yeah, for commonalities moving forward, it's good to know where the activities are seen as that's going to be welcome by everyone. So I think this sums up where work can be welcomed from, and where work can be pushed for the region. Thank you.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Warmest greetings of peace. I just want to add a few points in terms of perspectives coming from this region. One is that the interconnectedness of things, be it kids killed in a state in the United States, or a Filipino lawyer killed in a state in Philadelphia, or a Burmese killed in Rangoon or anywhere. It's a blow to the UN program of action in terms of its effectivity. And so we really have to think of that, not just as Anli mentioned, the synergies, but really more of the interconnectedness of efforts. Because again, all global instruments should succeed. So we welcome the view of the current chair, the Philippine mission, Philippines being the president of BMS8, taking into consideration a broader view on looking at the various aspects of the life cycle of a weapon. Asia Pacific has been awash with weapons. Day in, day out, weapons are being shipped here, and there should be an end to it. And so we really highlighted, and hopefully there should be some, not just probably more clear provisions on destruction, on ending the life of weapons at some point, so that there's a balance of the flow of weapons and also destroying a number of weapons. And be it a matter of a clear provision in the outcome document, but also the interpretation. It's just given a particular paragraph there, 45th, but it's in the context of conflict settings. It should be beyond those conflict settings. Even in peaceful countries, a lot of misuse and proliferation of weapons has been happening, and senseless deaths. The second point is on looking at, again, Amelie have pointed out this point more on the victim assistance. A lot of victims have really wanted not just the participation that paragraph 27 provides, but really more of victim assistance. There's a lot of lessons to be learned from states. How do they assist victims of senseless killings or even misuse of weapons? And again, even extraterritoriality of those incidents. If a Filipino is being shot in somewhere, or anyone who happens to be a victim of misuse of weapons beyond their borders. The third point is the role of the industries. I'm referring here to the arms industries. While they are referred to paragraph 27 to be part of a participative and very active industry to be consulted on the results, but really to have a more proactive role, not just on producing weapons, but really be a part of the destruction of their weapons. I know it's not written clearly there, but there is a big call that states should really engage the manufacturing companies. They really have a role to play. We are now in that stage where it's not just plastics that should be recalled and plastic makers will be responsible, but we really want to encourage states to clearly state a role of arms manufacturers to not just produce millions of weapons, but also have a responsibility in destroying weapons. The fourth point is on the, just to add a point on the synergies that Emily again mentioned, because it's a global call. Not just other instruments, but also included the recent explosive weapons in populated areas political declaration. I know it's really there are some points there that defines small arms and light weapons that includes even 100 millimeter less are considered to be small arms and light weapons by definition in Philippine laws. So 60 millimeter grenades are part of small arms and light weapons, and they are explosive weapons used in populated areas. Indeed, have again consequences that has humanitarian aspects. So just including that point in terms of addressing the interoperability of these global instruments. And the last point is on the tracing. I know it's written again in certain paragraphs in terms of looking at record keeping on weapons they have destroyed. It would be good that there should really be a clear, not just disaggregated data, but clear records on how much have we really destroyed in this as a part of a action plan. Again, we are thankful that the BMS 8 at least agenda have looked into a more broader view on addressing various aspects of the life cycle of weapons, and hopefully it would expand, not just really addressing just the illicit ones, but the interoperability and interconnectedness of these issues that have really have impact on people's lives. So thank you again, UNIDIR and UNODA for this opportunity to share our views. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Amelie, Mitzi, and Fred there for concluding the presentations for this session. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but I think we've given you plenty of information to take back with you as you prepare for BMS 8 next week. From the last presentations, it just strikes me that indeed it was very useful to make that point again. We have a changing and dynamic situation with regards to the illicit arms trade, but also with regard to developments at the national and regional levels to tackle the illicit arms trade, misuse, and the negative consequences as referred to there with regard to the issue of victims. And I greatly appreciated the approach of emphasizing the evolutionary developments that we've seen since 2001, and also a very clear message on what needs to be done further with regard to BMS 8 and also beyond this, emphasizing interconnectedness and different ways of taking illicit arms out of circulation to ensure that we can sort of live up to the potential and the ambition of the PoA from all those years ago, and keep it growing and evolving to meet the changing circumstances. And also there are some useful points at the end by Fred to think about linkages with other instruments that have just come into play. IWIPA, of course, which UNIDIR has also been involved in, and I'm also thinking of the open-ended working group on ammunition management as well in this regard. Before closing today's briefing, I'd really like to sincerely thank all of the panelists for their excellent contributions and reflections in preparation for BMS 8. I also want to express great appreciation to my colleagues Mathilde and Ruben, working tirelessly behind the scenes to make this happen, and also to our colleagues in ODA, in particular Nora, for their work behind the scenes too. And finally, a big thanks to all of the participants that joined us for taking the time to listen to the great presentations we've heard today. We hope that the presentations and the event will contribute towards your preparations for a successful BMS 8. And of course, we're hopeful this can support the efforts of the chair designate in this regard. And before signing off, I just wanted to remind you that you can watch again the fantastic presentations or share with your colleagues by visiting the UNIDIR website, and we'll share with you the link for that. Please do distribute widely. I'm hopeful that this will be of use. Wishing you all a great rest of the day or the evening. Thank you for joining us. And I look forward to seeing those of you that will be in New York next week in person. For those of you that won't, we hope that this has been useful and you can follow proceedings and developments in other means. Thank you so much. Farewell, everyone.